Hi, I'm Tim Moss. I'm the Chief Executive Officer and Comptroller General at the UK Intellectual Property Office, and talking to you on IP Fridays.
Hello and welcome to this episode of IP Fridays. Our names are Ken Suzanne and Rolf Claessen, and this is the podcast dedicated to intellectual property. It does not matter where you are from, in-house or private practice, novice or expert. We will help you stay up to date with current topics in the fields of trademarks, patents, design and copyright, discover useful tools, and much more.
Welcome to episode 124 of IP Fridays. We are sorry for skipping last month and for being late a couple of days this month, but we promise we will be back on track in December, and we'll have a really nice episode in December actually. And in January we have a very prominent guest. The Chief IP Counsel of Siemens, Beat Weibel, will be with us in January, so we are looking forward to the next exciting episodes of IP Fridays. Today's interview guest is Wolfgang Berres, who is deeply involved in the creation of a new standard for IP management and patent management. Currently, this is a DIN standard, so a German standard. But I can promise my listeners that the concepts from this standard are very interesting, especially for smaller and medium-sized companies handling patents and in general handling IP. Before we jump into the interview, I have some news for you. Austria is ratifying the UPC agreement, the agreement of the Unified Patent Court, in its plenary session on Friday 19th of November. Austria's National Council anonymously approved the draft legislation enabling Austria to ratify the protocol on the provisional application, the PPA, of the Unified Patent Court agreement. So Austria will likely be the last necessary country to ratify the agreement, and the agreement is, or better, the UPC is expected to open its doors by mid-next year. Germany had ratified the agreement earlier this year, and after that and before Austria, Slovenia has ratified the agreement as well. Today's topic is a new standard in IP, and my guest today is Wolfgang Berres of Woza und Kollegen. He's partner at the firm, and he talks with me about the new standard in IP. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Maybe you can tell our listeners and our viewers where you are coming from and what your background is, what you are doing at Woza und Kollegen.
Yeah, sure, love to. My background is actually way off the IP landscape. I have a master in management and computer science, and I worked for more than 25 years with Siemens AG. Last 10 years in the automotive business mainly, and my office was out of Detroit. And in 2009, I met with Professor Woza, and we developed ideas about a new way to handle IP management. For me, as a non-IP person, I was always asking for the business side of IP. So for me, as a starting point, always was customer benefits and business, rather than a legal interpretation of IP issues. And therefore, over time, I guess we came up with a couple of pretty good ideas. And today I'm a consultant of Woza and Colleagues, and in addition, I'm a spokesperson for a group we call KIMIP, a Quality Initiative for the Management of IP, which is a non-profit association, and we're going to help especially around the implementation of the new standard we're going to talk about.
Yes, let's talk about this new standard. What is this standard exactly? What is the name? The first thing is maybe the name. What is it? What is the specification basically? And then what it's all about? Like why do we need a standard? What is the standard? Maybe you can just briefly introduce the standard before we go more into depth.
Sure, I will. What is it all about, and why do we need another standard? Actually, there is a ISO standard on its way. The standard we are talking about is a DIN standard right now. A DIN standard meaning a German standard on IP management, and it's called DIN 7070-006. We couldn't get 007, would have been probably smarter. But anyhow, this standard is about IP management system requirements. And especially requirements is quite important in that context, because the standard is an implementation standard of the DIN ISO 9001. Most of you will be quite aware of, because most of the companies obviously have this standard certified or are certified by this standard. And the 7070-006 from the very beginning was thought to be a very similar requirement standard, which means it's based on the very same so-called high-level structure. And a high-level structure is just the agenda of the standard and of all the ISO 9000 standards.
We'll talk about later about the exact structure and what are the common principles among all these 9000 standards. But before we jump into that, maybe first we'll talk about what have been the challenges in IP management so far. And so what are the challenges? Where did the idea for the standard come from? Why did you develop the standard? What went wrong so far? Let's talk about the general background, like why did we need it, a new standard, and what have been the challenges in IP that this standard is addressing?
I guess one of the ideas we had in the very beginning, we started working on that standard probably 4 or 5 years ago, and there was an initiative we had before where we talked to a lot of companies and talked about the status of IP departments, and we found out that IP, and for me that was quite interesting, as I'm not the IP guy. It was interesting that IP was kind of an island within the companies, and somehow not only an island because of the topics that we're dealing with, which were obviously legal topics, not really business topics, but also very often because of the people who were working there. We met a lot of people in IP departments who were former R&D people. And one day it was decided, okay, we need somebody to take care of IP, and why don't we move you to the IP department and until you retire. Sounds strange, but it's really true. It was a different understanding. The traditional IP work in, I would say, mid-sized companies. I'm not talking about the big ones, but in mid-sized companies, you have 1, 2, 3 people working on IP, and what they do is more or less administrative work, and there is no really best practice available for them. And that's what happened during our consulting work. We got a lot of questions about, can you help us with a best practice example to build a efficient IP department, and that's where it all started. And over time, we found out, or the idea developed in a direction that IP management in itself is not another name for the work of the IP department, but IP management is actually a challenge for the whole company. And therefore, this standard, which describes requirements for IP management, describes requirement for a company rather than the IP department. That's actually something which distinguishes this standard from the ISO 56005, which is called IP management in the, if I recall it correctly, IP management in the innovation management guideline. So it's a guideline versus a requirement, and this guideline shows certain best practices, methods, tools you can implement in an IP department. So here, IP management is more or less understood as an organization where we define in our standard IP management as a process and a management system.
So you are also likely talk about processes and concepts that have not been part of many IP departments before. You are introducing also new ideas into existing companies that so far, existing departments that so far mostly just basically administered IP rights and not really had any creative take on how to work with IP, let's say.
I wouldn't say we created now new processes or we have brand new ideas in terms of what's the IP management of the future. And we have distinguished between the traditional IP management and a more active contemporary IP management, where we think the active IP management is not an IP management waiting for an invention. I guess that's exactly what the picture has been. There is a department waiting for an invention, and if R&D or anybody else in the company is not inventing anything, they will just wait. And an active IP management will discuss what the instrument IP is capable of, how you can use these prohibitive rights, so to speak, and how you can act in the market or develop a market and protect your market using these instruments. So an active IP department will be involved in business strategies, and that's what it's all about. We are talking about a business-centric approach versus a I would say invention-centric approach.
So you already mentioned now the challenges of the past and basically summarized what are the advantages of the new standard. So, but maybe we go into a little bit more detail what the advantage of this new standard is. Why do companies like mid-sized companies need this standard? Can't they just use you as a consultant to get better in IP management? Of course they can, but why? How is the standard helping them to improve their IP management?
Okay. First of all, and it's always the same question: is the standard not just an additional workload for a department, or is it helping to develop a best practice or a more efficient system within the company? Now, this standard has, because it is an implementation standard of the DIN 9001, it uses not only existing terminology or an existing structure, it it is actually defined as a management system and therefore easily implements with other management systems in a company. So we take the IP department off the aisle and put it right in the middle of the company, back again where it belongs. And so we have interacting elements of the organization like policies. And we have IP policies and we have other policies and we have business objectives and we have obviously business processes. And so we have IP processes to directly connect with these business processes. And all this is based on a structure which is well known to companies for many, many years, and a core process which is called the PDCA cycle.
We'll talk about that a little later, I promise. But maybe first, you're saying basically that companies who already implemented ISO 9001 standards and they are very familiar with the concept and they can it will be not so difficult for them to grasp the core concepts of this new standard and implement this new standard. Did I hear you right?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the idea behind this. We didn't want to create something completely different or new, and it doesn't make sense at all to come up with a different principle or a different idea of standards, because if you want to achieve total quality management, or if you'd like to implement a total quality management system, you have to go with the ISO 9000 group of standards. No question.
Okay. Before we recorded this interview, we talked about this new standard a little bit, and you said there are basically there are many important aspects of this new standard, but two are coming to mind especially, and one is risk management, and the other one is to find and exploit opportunities within the IP landscape or of an IP portfolio. Let's talk about risk management first. What is your message here? What do the listeners and viewers need to know about the new standard in connection with risk management?
Yeah, the risk management, it's like always. If you need a certain pressure to change your organization, it's stupid, but a pressure coming from a certain risk is always always helps you to change a little faster than if it's just an opportunity you have. And same here, over the last couple of years, with the digital transition or transformation, a lot of companies have implemented it not into their own organization, but into their business, into their business models. So everybody likes to be digital nowadays. And with the digitalization of the business, suddenly in IP, risk or the risk scenario has changed completely. If we just imagine that we would create an application for a company, and the application would somehow interact with a 5G campus network, then the specialists here would know instantly that 5G means probably around 25,000 patents or a patent portfolio, even though it might be organized by your telecom provider or whatever. But still, there is a definite risk that at the end of the day you will infringe certain patents if you're not looking into, or if you're not implementing a process to make sure you have done everything and you have step-by-step discovered potential risk areas. And that's what risk management is all about. And the standard is asking to implement risk management rather than doing FTOs across the planet.
And that was my question. The difference between risk management and FTO.
The FTO approach is, and I have to be careful now as I'm talking to a patent attorney and know much better what this is all about. But I would say an FTO approach usually tries to go for the more or less 100% solution. You might say, that has never been possible, and it was always only 90%, or tell me what you want to pay, and I do the FTO I can do for that money. And all this is not really businesslike. It's not really sufficient if you think about managing risk on a company level. And we always have to manage risk as a company. And the CEO or CFO, he's familiar, or she is familiar with managing these kind of risks. But the IP risk was, I would say, was never really implemented in the risk management model of a company. And that's what now is part of this IP management system, that it is a requirement that IP management risks are described in a way that a company is able to handle them. And at the end of the day, it has to be a management decision. Okay, if we know there is a risk, okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to go for that business, or are we going to stop the business? It's always a management decision.
Right. Okay. Then there was the second aspect about how to find and identify opportunities and how to exploit these opportunities. How does the DIN norm help with that?
Yeah, that's a part I like much better than the risk management part, because opportunity is always a beautiful new, I would say, construct, because for the first time we're coming up, and that's really new because it's even a new created word, I'd like to say so, because we come up with the IP design principle. And IP design refers to the design of an object, especially a digital object, like an app or use case or a digital business model. And these objects are related typically to business goals. I'd like to grow my market share. So I'm looking at a digital business object, and with IP design, I make sure that these digital objects are built in a way that they are patentable and that you take the necessary steps, going back to risk management, so you do not infringe the right of third parties. But you have to watch out. I'm not talking about taking an invention and making a patent out of it. I'm talking about designing IP around a digital object. So we change the digital object if necessary to make it patentable. We don't change the invention. Sounds maybe a bit complicated, but if it is part of the idea of the standard that a process like this, IP creation process, needs to be implemented in a different way within the innovation management of a company or the idea management of a company.
Does it also encompass things like licensing opportunities? Let's say it in a positive term or in a negative term, saying extorting licenses from others, like
absolutely,
like mentioning the keyword patent troll or so. Of course, this is a really negative word, but of course, when you have patents, you are yourself developed this technology, and you're using the technology, and someone else is using the technology. Of course, there is the clear right to defend your turf, but there are also companies that are just amassing patents and trying to find licensing opportunities and suing other companies for patent infringement just for as a business model, basically. And these are two different things, and there is no black and white. But how does this DIN norm play into this field?
It definitely does. I just had a conversation with an automotive supplier, well-known, Continental, and the problem they were telling me about is that they were saying that the world of patents, or the world of relationship between suppliers and customers regarding patents has changed dramatically, because you're not infringing anymore. If you're dealing with your direct supplier, you might infringe even patents of somebody in the value chain way back, talking about typical cases like Broadcom versus Volkswagen and so on.
Yes.
So, and the question was, is it helpful to have a standard? Because with a standard, you can't avoid infringement, which has happened already. And I have to say, just consider maybe one point. If you have a contract with your supplier and the contract gives you the freedom of third-party rights, which is usually written into a contract, a supplier contract. It says freedom of third-party rights. If it would say freedom of third-party rights based on DIN 7070-006, you have the opportunity at least to go back, talk to your supplier and say, okay, I'd like to do a third-party audit on what you have done on your risk management side. So suddenly with the DIN, you have something in your hands you can work with. It's not that infringements are going to disappear, and patent trolls are not disappearing anyhow, but it's one little additional cornerstone to build this kind of new IP management building.
Yes, okay. I promised you that we also talk about the PDCA model, and let's talk about this in our last section of our interview. PDCA stands for Plan, Do, Check, and Act. And all the 9001 standards are based on this basic principle. You gave me a picture that I can show here in a second.
Yep.
Illustrating the model. Maybe you can talk about how the DIN norm is implementing this general principle. I'm showing the picture now.
Okay, it's the PDCA cycle, or so-called Deming cycle, is core to these type of standards, because it's actually the basis for total quality management. And why? Pretty easy, because it requires from everybody who's implementing the standard to have a plan, to do what the plan says, to check if it has been done what the plan said, and if there has been any changes, and if improvement is necessary, to act and change things to go into the next planning phase. This is pretty obvious. It was brought up in the 9000 standards when they moved from the old way to the new way, and the new way of the standard was a process-oriented standard, because this here is a process. And as you can see on this picture, what we did, we took the processes we had discussed, or derived out of the IP management, typical IP management environment, and implemented these processes into the PDCA cycle. And okay, there's a lot of more details to it, but in principle, you can say there is an operational part, and there you have everything from the IP administration in the IP department. IP administration obviously is still very much in the IP department. You have IP generation, we just talked about, creation, generation, where we have all the opportunities. You have IP enforcement, your legal arm here, and IP defense. And you have, and you talked about it already, the topic of IP transactions. So if you buy or sell licenses here in IP, that's part of the IP transaction process. So all this is the operation, so to speak, but and you might have both part of the operation inside an organization like an IP department. But outside of the IP department, for sure, is the IP objective and IP policy area, because that's business related, and as well is the IP strategy, which here in the center part of this model belongs to the leadership part of the standard. And leadership is not just the IP department leadership, it's actually the business leadership we're talking about here. So what we have achieved with building a process-driven standard based on PDCA, I guess we moved the IP department back where it belongs to a level, to a business-oriented area in the company, not only area.
It's not an island anymore where people are banned after they have been working in development and research, but it's more now like a core of the company.
It has to be part of the CTO, CEO, CFO agenda. Mm-hmm. And I guess everybody who started implementing that now understood it right away, and it is quite helpful that we have people in the companies who deal with quality management, and these quality management people know exactly that as all the other quality topics are management related, now IP is management related as well.
So this was a very thorough and fun interview. Thank you very much for coming here and spending your time with me and explaining to me and the listeners and viewers about this new norm in IP management. If people still have questions about this, I mean, we could only touch the surface basically and the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more about this initiative. Where can people go to find out more about this norm and about your work on standardizing the IP management process?
Yeah, as I mentioned already, we have a little group where we'd like to offer support for companies, usually small, medium-sized companies, but whoever is interested in working with the new standard. And this group is called KIMIP, Quality Initiative for the Management of IP, and it's www.kimip.de.
KIMIP is spelled?
QIMIP.
All right. Okay, I'm linking this also in the show notes, and
perfect.
So Thank people can just click on the link and find more about you. Yeah. Thank you very much for being on the show.
And thank you for having me. All right.
That's it for this episode. If you liked what you heard, please show us your love by visiting ipfridays.com/love and tweet a link to this show. We would be so grateful if you would do that. It would help us out to get the word out. Also, please subscribe to our podcast at ipfridays.com or on iTunes or Stitcher.com. If you have a question or want to be featured in one of the upcoming episodes, please send us your feedback at ipfridays.com/feedback. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes. You can go to ipfridays.com/iTunes and it will take you right to the correct page on iTunes. If you want to get mentioned on this podcast or even have comments within the next episode, please leave us your voicemail at ipfridays.com/voicemail. You have been listening to an episode of IP Fridays. The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by their respective law firms. None of the content should be considered legal advice. The IP Fridays podcast should not be construed as legal advice or legal opinion on any specific facts or circumstances. The contents of this podcast are intended for general informational purposes only, and you are urged to consult your own lawyer on any specific legal questions. As always, consult a lawyer or patent or trademark attorney. Copyright 2014, all rights reserved.